Islamic faith's perspective, we know that forced migration has played an important role in the life of the faiths throughout the history. As long as I think the human beings have been on Earth, migration, specifically forced migration, has been part of our lives. So we've got three speakers this evening to speak from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim perspective about how the migration has, specifically forced migration, has shaped the religious communities throughout the history. But before we start discussing, I would like to ask the speakers to just go around quickly and introduce yourself so that those who are watching us through Facebook, YouTube, or at Zoom platform knows who is speaking. So instead of me going through each one's bios, I would like to ask everyone to take a turn. So can I go with Alana with you first?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me as part of the panel discussion, Aidan and the Turquoise Institute. It's a very interesting and important topic, particularly with the reality we live in South Africa today. My name is Alana Baranov. I am a freelance writer and a human rights activist. I'm based in Durban, South Africa. I represent the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and the Jewish community on the steering committee of the Hate Crimes Working Group, which works towards hate crimes awareness and legislation in the country. And I'm also a member of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps for the World Jewish Congress.
Great. Father Rampe?
Good evening, and thank you. I'd like to say thank you for the invitation. As I said, my name is Rampe Thobo. I'm a Jesuit priest based in Cape Town at the moment, and I work as a social apostolate coordinator of the Jesuits in South Africa. Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Omar? Your microphone is off, I think. Yeah. Your mic, you need to unmute, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Omar Gia. I am a legal consultant and a human rights specialist. So I'm also managing the International Solidarity for African Union Weekend for the refugees for the past 15 years. Yeah. So the refugee situation in South Africa is one of my serious concerns because I work on it regularly. We also got involved a lot in community conversation recently during the xenophobic attacks with the Mandela's Foundation.
Okay.
So I'm based in Durban.
Okay, so tonight we are between Durban and Cape Town. Good. All right. Thank you so much. I think we've got an interesting panel because this issue, as much as we look at it from a faith perspective, it has a lot to do with human rights and in general issue of freedom. Because I think a lot of the forced migration takes place as a result of lack of freedom, because most people, when they feel they do not have the freedom to practice what they believe in a certain place, they feel they need to go and look for other places where they are accepted. I think to start off, because we are looking at the refugees, forced migration from a faith perspective, I would like the speakers to speak from a historical perspective. How has the forced migration has played out throughout the history of specific faiths? What was it like when the faith had started? I mean, we know the older prophet. Jesus, Mary was herself a refugee, had to leave her place. Prophet Muhammad had to leave a place. Moses, we know that he had to travel and leave where he was. So I would like to ask the speakers to speak from that perspective. How has this forced migration has played out throughout the history of the specific faiths? So can we go with Alana first? I will specifically go with Alana first with the speakers because she might have to run out at any stage. So we would like to accommodate her, and then we'll move on to other speakers.
Hello?
Sorry. Alana, I think your microphone is off. So I would like you to speak from a historical perspective on the issue of refugees and forced migration.
Perfect. From a Jewish principle, there's no tenet that's been repeated more in Jewish texts than the present to love and welcome the stranger. But the biblical principle that we see in Judaism was not without a historical context as well. It's even mentioned in the book of Joshua and throughout Jewish history. Jewish refugees were joined by non-Jews as well in fleeing drought, famine, slavery, persecution, and invaders. And the duty of protecting strangers vulnerable to xenophobic violence was an important principle for Jews during biblical times up until modern times today. We have a famous rabbi, Rabbi Hillel, who was a great teacher of the 1st century AD. And he replied when he was accepting a challenge from somebody to recite the entire Torah standing on one foot, "What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. That is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary." So that has really been a guiding principle throughout Jewish history. And we have seen, sadly, many times where Jews have been forced to flee their homes due to persecution and discrimination. There were those who fled the Crusades during the Middle Ages, and later there was the Spanish Inquisition that targeted many Jews. There were also hundreds of thousands of Jews who fled from the pogroms in Russia, and Jews who were victims of the Nazi persecution during the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews perished. There were also Jews that suffered under repression during the Soviet Union times who sought freedom elsewhere. And even in our own South African Jewish community, most families here have ancestors who came to this country because they were fleeing for their lives as refugees. So there really is that strong connection. And Jewish communities know what it is like to arrive in a strange country with nothing but fearful memories of the past, and to be without the language of the local inhabitants, without social networks and connections, and being dependent on others. So this immigrant experience really goes back to the roots of our faith, to Abraham, who was forced to leave his birthplace and his home and family for an uncertain future in a foreign land. And today, so many people around the world are undergoing that same experience and the same plight that is facing the Jewish community. And so we all need to stand together as Jews and as people of faith across all religions to not ignore the plight of refugees.
Thank you so much. Can I ask then Father Rampe to give us a historical picture from Christian history of how forced migration has affected the Christian communities?
Thank you so much. I think to kickstart the discussion, for us, I mean, when you look at Christianity, we start talking about forced displacement with the displacement of the Holy Family, the flight into Egypt in Matthew chapter 2, where Jesus, the baby Jesus has to be taken to Egypt for safety because Herod wanted to kill the child. And so Joseph and Mary, they have to go with the child into Egypt. And when you look at that, it's similar to what we talk about even today when we talk of refugees the conditions and definition of the refugees, we see Christ or the Holy Family meeting all those conditions of, owing to a well-founded fear of persecution, they had to flee for safety into Egypt. So that's our beginning as Christians, where we find forced displacement in our scriptures. And of course, Jesus, as he grows up to start his mission as in Matthew 25, we hear also he talks of welcoming the stranger. You look at Matthew 25, I think verse 35, he says, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. So they not only do we see, we don't see a displacement itself, but advocating for welcoming the displaced or the stranger or the one who has moved away from his or her home. So that's where it starts in the Christian tradition. And I think what informs from moving from there, then we have the question of hospitality and taking care of your neighbor. We have the greatest commandment in the Gospels. The love of God and the love of neighbor informs our relations, or the way we should relate with one another, and most importantly, the vulnerable, including the refugees. So that's basically the historical background of the Christian tradition. And we can move into other things later, maybe after we have looked at the Islamic tradition.
Thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Omar, can you then speak to how has the forced migration?
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Now, Islamically, according to the history, Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad, he had to flee for his life during the Hijrah, and he went to Mecca. And when he was going to Mecca, it was for safety. And he was received there. He entered Mecca victoriously. And from there, if he was not received peacefully by people he found there, he wouldn't have been able to teach us all that he has brought to us, including the Quran. So today, when we see in Islamic tradition, there is a development that took place recently in 1990 already, the Islamic approach of human rights. And they have in it some few quotes that I want to read here because it's important. Those who believe and immigrated and
I think we seem to battle with the technology there.
We may have lost it.
Yeah, okay, we'll wait if he comes back. A few seconds. All right. Okay. Maybe we can continue the discussion with okay, it's coming back as well. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Yes.
Is my microphone okay?
Yes, it's okay now. If you prefer, you can switch off your video.
Hello?
I'm not sure if that will help the connection. Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello?
Okay, we can hear you. Okay. Okay, while Mr. Omar is trying to connect, those who are watching us through a different medium, yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Okay, can you, yeah, please go ahead, we can hear you now. Can you hear us? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask those friends who are watching us on different social media platforms to also check our other social media, Twitter and Facebook pages. We'll be sharing updates on those platforms as well. So I think what I'm going to do is to maybe continue. Okay, can you hear us now, Mr. Omar? Are you back with us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Let me go first then. Yeah, also those who believe and emigrated and strove in the cause of God, as well as those who hosted them and gave them refuge and supported them, these are true believers. They have deserved forgiveness and generous recompense. That is Quran, Surah Al-Anfal. So, and that goes together with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, which says everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other country asylum and from persecution. So, to that junction, we could see that Islamically, the history of human rights is enshrined in the Quran itself as a fundamental issue that need to be considered. The protection of people who flee their home from persecution is something that is common to Islamic tradition. So I think because of the connection issues that I'm having, I'll carry here and try to fix it while I'm listening to others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
because
thank you.
All
right, no, thank you for that. Yeah, I wanted to get to the legal definition as well, because now that we have somebody who works in the legal field, so it's good to have that perspective as well. Okay, let's move on then. With the forced migration happening throughout the history, can we look at maybe a few examples where the underlying reasons? Yes, it's an issue of freedom, but why is it that the people of faith have been targeted? Let's move on. I mean, we know that if you look at it from a religious perspective, prophets have been sent to bring mercy to humanity, to bring goodness to humanity. Jesus came to save the humanities, and why then have they had to face so much of hardship that people had to react that way? So can we maybe, while we have maybe Mr. Omar, I see you online at the moment, maybe let's hear from you before we might lose you again, so then we can move on. Mr. Omar, can you hear us? I think we've got a problem there. Okay, let's go with Father Rampe. With the historically, we know that the religions, prophets have come, or Jesus has come to save the humanity, to bring happiness to humanity. Where is the breakdown? Where does it sort of happen that the persecution starts and takes place, and then the people of faith always have to run away?
Well, I think the question of persecution, it's a challenge because, firstly, I think when we look at, I think it's in Deuteronomy where it's said that, look, I put before you good and evil, you choose what is good. So from the beginning, God has given each one of us freedom to choose. But he would like us to choose what is good. And in most cases, and we've seen right through humanities, and then even with the wars that we've had, the violation of human rights, the wars that we've had in the 20th century, beginning of 21st century, you see that the human person has chosen evil instead of choosing good. So that's maybe where we should start that. So we have decided to choose that which is not pleasing to our Creator. And then secondly, the lack of respect for things, human rights and all that. And I think coming into if you look at the legal perspective of things, part of the problem is that maybe we are too much legalistic and we forget the ethical and moral side of things, which should be the guiding principle essentially. And even when we talk of the human rights, if maybe I may go into that, I mean, where do the human rights emanate from? Human rights, they emanate from the fact that, from human dignity, which comes from the fact that each and every one of us was created in the image of God. So we all carry that image of God. And for as long as we don't see others carry that image of God, for as long as we don't see others having human dignity, then human rights become just a legal entity and not a moral and ethical entity. So maybe that's where the problem begins, that we use more the legal things, the legal perspective of things, instead of going into the ethical and moral aspect of things. So for Christianity, and I think for Judaism and Islam as well, we do believe that each one of us carries this image of God in each one of us. But also with Christianity, we also look into the question of the incarnation. The incarnation, it further gives us that dignity, because in beings, through the incarnation, a Christian. So it is through the understanding that they exist in Christianity, the teaching of love or charity for others. So irrespective of their social or social background. So we all carry that image of God, which gives us the dignity, that the human dignity we have, which gives us the human rights that we talk about. So maybe I'll stop there for now, and then I'll come back later on other things. Thank you.
Okay. Let's continue from the same point. While we're talking about the reasons, what foregrounds these persecutions in the history, Alana, do you want to also touch about moral and ethical dimensions of where the approach and our perspective comes in towards refugees? Where do we position ourselves from our faith perspective?
I would love to. Thank you, Aidan. And like Father Rampe said, I think the start of all of our religions starts with a story about a prophet or a beloved leader or a teacher having to flee. And in the Jewish tradition, as I mentioned previously, it really begins with Abraham having to flee his homeland and go to a foreign land because he was sharing the idea of monotheism, and he was persecuted for that. And I think this othering and dehumanization of somebody who shares a different or new belief or who is not part of our similar group is something that has targeted all faiths and many cultures and communities throughout history. To turn now to an understanding of the Jewish connection around human rights, which has also been touched on by the other two speakers, I would like to speak a little bit about the tradition of justice in Judaism. The teachings of Judaism place a great deal of emphasis on justice, and Judaism incorporates a set of values that looks to defend human spirit, freedom, creativity, and also to create a system of order to foster a harmonious society. And throughout all the writings of the Jewish prophets, all members of society are held accountable for the injustices perpetrated against the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, who symbolize the powerless in society. So many of the mitzvahs or commandments of the Torah exhort us, in the words of Isaiah, to learn to do good, to seek justice, vindicate the victim, and take up the grievance of the widow. So here we really have a call to uphold and implement justice to the uppermost moral virtue throughout the Jewish religious texts. And we have two distinct pillars that I'd also like to touch on briefly that are essential to the notion of justice in Judaism. The one is tzedakah, or charity, and the other is tikkun olam, or repairing the world. So this principle of tikkun olam is seen throughout history as integral to Jewish programs of social action, or social justice as we call it today. And the Kabbalistic notion of tikkun is representing the idea that the world has been profoundly broken, and it can only be fixed or made whole again through human action. So Judaism is a very experiential religion. It places merit not just in ideas and dogma, but also in action. So that's very important. And another important aspect of Judaism to look at when we're having a human rights discussion is the concept of equality. So in the Talmud, it is written that whoever destroys a single soul, a single human being, is considered to be diminishing God's presence on earth. And whoever saves a single soul, a single human being, is considered to have saved an entire world. So the importance of the individual and all of us being equal is evident there. Also in Genesis, we have in chapter 1 a description of the start of humanity, where humanity was created as a unique being, male and female. The very name Adam in Hebrew, according to the Torah, embraces all of humanity. So equality is set as a baseline norm there. And together these two values create a human rights approach that we can find in Jewish religious texts that, as Mr. Omar said, is enshrined in documents that we have today, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948. And it was the first time that the international community agreed that all people deserve a minimum standard of treatment. And in many ways, I see the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a secular and modern 10 Commandments. So that is a very interesting connection that we have between the Abrahamic faiths.
Right, thank you, Anna. We've got one comment that came through, so let me share that. Lindiwe Koza says, socioeconomic politics and current state of refugee families, emergency response, and how we can contribute to the national and global agenda is what I hope was surfaced in this conversation. Yes, I would like to come to this a little later, but I think from the discussions what I am hearing is that the human agency is an important factor in terms of both causing the refugee crisis and then responding to this crisis. What do the faiths say how we respond to the refugee crisis? For example, yes, it does happen, and it happens to the faith communities. But then we've got members of the faith who are not being persecuted and who are actually in a position to respond to this crisis. So what do the faiths, let's talk about what does the faith say and how do we respond to this crisis, those who had to become refugees. We know that no one leaves home out of their own willingness, especially if they are forced. So what is it that we as the members of the faiths have to do? How do we respond to the crisis? What's our responsibilities? Alana, do you want to continue?
Sure. Well, as I discussed before, there really is an imperative, a moral imperative from our faith and from our history for us to act. And so we've seen across the Jewish world a variety of humanitarian organizations that have rallied around to look at how they can assist with a short-term relief effort where people are displaced, they are refugees, they are victims of xenophobia, and they need help with basic necessities in an immediate environment and context. And in South Africa in 2008, in 2015, and sadly again in 2019, our community rallied around and together with organizations from other faith-based groups, as well as other human rights groups, were involved in rallying around and making sure that basic necessities could be donated to the individuals that were affected. But I think a very important aspect is also being involved in the long-term need to understand the cause of the problems and also find solutions. And that is something that also the Jewish community here in South Africa and around the world have been involved in. And looking at the South African context, I know that following the 2008 xenophobic violence, a lot of civil society organizations that were involved with the refugee community wanted to look at how long-term steps could be taken to address xenophobia. And the Hate Crimes Working Group was created, and I've been privileged to be a part of the steering committee of that organization from the beginning. And we are a network of civil society groups from various sectors: the refugee community, the LGBTIQ plus community, the Muslim community, the Christian community. Everyone's represented, and we work at advocating for hate crimes legislation in South Africa, because through the correct legislation, we would have the correct monitoring, policing, and prosecution of crimes of hate. And many of the refugee community are targeted, unfortunately, in South Africa for being others and are victims of hate crimes. So it's important to have that aspect covered, and the community has been involved in that.
Thank you. I see we've got Mr. Omar back with us. I hope you can hear. You can hear us.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, great. Maybe what we can do, if you would like to share your perspectives that you feel are important before we lose you to a technical glitch again. So do you want to go ahead and share what you feel sits at the core of this issue from your perspective?
Yeah, I would clearly say the reason why many people, precisely the prophet, for example, and religious, who are supposed to be those to help the community to resolve most of their issues on the ground of be it psychologically, spiritually, and all those things, are persecuted is first because I believe that human nature is too close to
Okay, we'll try again when he's back with us. I think we'll just keep trying to hear from him as soon as he manages to connect. Yes. Okay. I think we spoke about the human agents. I think Father Rampe, I think maybe you can talk to us on the human agency and in terms of what the faith expects from the faithful in terms of the way we respond to the refugee crisis. And let's look at both in terms of the short-term response, where we meet the immediate needs of the refugees, and also in terms of long-term responses. How do we curb so that we slow down the rate of displacement of the people?
I think the expectation will proceed from where
Can
I
you
left
hear me?
on the question. He's back. Do you want him to take over?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to continue?
Yes, please.
Please, yes, please do.
Yeah, I was saying it is human nature to like what is rather easy. So human nature not to like effort, but it is God wishes that people should prefer where they have to put in a bit of effort in everything. It's easy, very easy to do bad. Very difficult to do good because good demand commitment. So I think that that's the reason why many times we will see that those who come with the idea of doing good are persecuted. They are persecuted because they are not understood. They see them as a standalone person. Who are they to be this different? And that together with what we call the fear of the unknown, bring people to develop different character, sometimes very aggressively against them. So that could have been a justification for the fate of our prophets and all those who, like them, try to guide people. The human nature
Right. Okay. I think it seems
We've lost him again.
Yeah, we lost him again. So, Father Rampe, maybe you want to continue?
Yes, as I was saying, I mean, the response, of course, the response, firstly, I think it should start from the fact that change of attitude. Like I said earlier on, we carry this image of God, which gives us the human dignity and the human rights. So we move from firstly, everybody must recognize and maybe change the attitude and realize that in that image of God, in that human dignity, it's something sacred. So firstly, you cannot treat the other person as trash or violate their human rights because they carry that image of God. So from there, it's that understanding. We need to have that common understanding so that we can be able to respect each other's human rights and not violate them. So that's basically part of dealing with the root causes of forced displacement, if I may put it that way, from an ethical and moral perspective and religious perspective as well. So, and then we have a situation as Christians, the love of God, the love of neighbor. Saint Augustine, he says, you cannot. I think actually it was written. It was first in the Epistle of John. You cannot say you love God if you do not see, and yet you don't love your neighbor that you can see. So whoever says loves God that he cannot see, and yet hates the neighbor is a liar. So that deals with. So when we say we are religious people, we are believers. So our attitudes must reflect what we say we believe. And then that should be reflected in our relations with one another. Because when you look at the Holy Trinity, we look at the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as a community. And and there are relations there, and love is at the center of that relationship. And that love, it must be reflected between me and you who say we are believers. So as the church, as a community of religious believers, we are called to love one another. And it means that now I cannot violate your human rights because I'm supposed to love you as a believer. So that's where the problem begins, that we don't respect the laws that we have been given. And then secondly, having heard, earlier I said Jesus himself was a refugee. He had the flight into Egypt. So as the host communities, we are invited to be hospitable. Hospitality is one of the big things in our religion, and I think even in Judaism and in Islam, we need to be hospitable, especially to those who are vulnerable, the poor, the widow, and those whose rights have been violated. So people have to change attitude, look at the way they perceive one another. So, meaning when we deal with the push and pull factors of forced displacement, our faith has to be in the center. My faith, my belief should be the guiding principles, the values that our religion teaches us. So for me, that's where we start. And then we have the response. Obviously, we've had over the years, especially in the Catholic tradition, where different popes, leaders, Catholic leaders, have advocated for the human rights of those who have been displaced and for their protection. And we know Pope Francis, who is the current leader, head of the Catholic Church at the moment, he speaks a lot about welcoming the refugees and all those who are forcibly displaced. And he has done a lot of things, not only by preaching, but even practical things in trying to protect, to welcome welcome the refugees and making sure that the cause of the refugees is advocated for. So I will stop there for now, and then I can come back later if I need to elaborate more.
All right. Okay, I've got a few comments and questions. Maybe I will read the comments and then share the questions with you, so that we can also address the questions coming from the audience. We've got two comments. In fact, when you spoke about love, I think this connects with that. Zubaydah Tofi says, without love and kindness in our hearts towards others, without mercy and compassion, without humility in our conduct and regard for others, regardless of faith or persuasion, those of us who claim to be religious are little more than imposters with a veneer of piety. It's the comment. And love the conversation tonight and learning so much. Please thank all at THI for organizing the event and the discussion that inspired through sharing knowledge by respected panelists. And Shamila Adams says, from my opinion, I truly believe our Creator would put humanity first on the list when it comes to serving our human being. I've got a few questions that came on the Zoom platform, so let me read them, and perhaps you want to take notes and come back and respond to this. One question, it's specifically for Alana. It says, can converts to Judaism specifically those that are white fully identify with the lengthy history of Jewish persecution and being refugees? I ask because I know some converts to the Jewish faith that who say, let's say, it is very difficult for them to talk about Holocaust, for example, when they have no historical connection to it. And then another question, can the speakers elaborate on how faith communities are making use of their houses of worship to accommodate refugees and asylum seekers? I know that a number of churches in Johannesburg CBD offer shelter for refugees. That's one. And then we've got two more questions or comments. Assalamu alaikum, shalom, hello to everyone. As we know, in history, this type of forced migration applied to all religions. Today, we especially the young generation, how we can stop these injustices, ancient Pharaoh or today's dictators, not because of his movement, not being a Muslim, not being a Christian, not being a Jewish, not because of human being. Our Creator looks at us, and He is the only one who knows everything. And I feel in my heart the Creator is not happy because of us keeping silence against dictators. I think He's asking what is our responsibility in terms of stopping all these persecutions today? What can we do? And the last one is the major root cause of forced displacement or forced migration are the governments. Why the religious voice seems low in challenging the evil statesman? Okay, so that talks about the speaking truth to the power, I think. So okay, I think we got Mr. Omar. Maybe if he can hear us and if we can hear him. Shall we try again? But I think we are losing him again. All right. Do you want to then, Alana, do you want to go first, responding to the questions and comments? Because we're also running out of time slowly, so maybe we should wrap up with the comments and questions from the audience.
Sure, I'd love to. The question specifically about converts to Judaism. I think that the Holocaust in particular, which the anonymous attendee brought up, as we know, was the persecution and the murder of 6 million Jews, as well as other victims who were murdered in the Holocaust. But the 6 million Jews that were targeted by the Nazi regime were European Jews. And Jews also from North Africa and the Mediterranean region. And Jews were targeted not because of the color of their skin or gender or age, but simply because they were Jewish. So it went across race and other divides. And unfortunately, anti-Semitism and the history of anti-Semitism that we've seen throughout the world has also targeted Black Jews, white Jews, across the spectrum. And I think that a convert, somebody who comes to a religion because they feel a deep attraction to the religion, might not have the historical connection through their family, but I think they have the spiritual connection to that religion. And events like the Holocaust and persecution of Christians and persecution of Muslims around the world, I think touches all people of faith. So it might not be my religion that is specifically being persecuted in that instance, but we have the solidarity and we can learn the lessons from that. So I think it's quite universal, this topic. And then speaking a little bit to the other two comments about what can be done, I think that's a very important part of the discussion tonight, because we have this obligation to have solidarity and to advocate for the refugees, but what can we do specifically here in South Africa? I think the one point that I would like to make is again about hate crimes, the importance of seeing prejudice and crimes committed against refugees and asylum seekers as hate crimes. A hate crime is defined by the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe as a criminal act that's committed with a biased motivation. So it's an act that targets a victim because of their perceived membership of a social group, and it's a message crime that really takes a psychological toll not just on the victim but also on the entire community. And it often happens in an environment where prejudice against a particular group is seen as socially acceptable. And unfortunately, in South Africa today, we have that with xenophobia and our refugee community. And if we have the appropriate legislation in place to deal with xenophobia and other hate crimes, then we'd be able to record, police, and improve the judicial response, which would go some way to stopping this form of hatred. And I think another 2 points I'd like to make on that are the need for social cohesion. I think it's crucial when we are working with refugees in South Africa and around the world to be looking for ways that we can create and bolster social cohesion projects that can force inclusion and build bridges between communities. That is something that I think faith-based groups can really play an important role in. And another point is language. As people of faith, we really need to hold the actions and the language of our religious and community leaders to account. Words really do matter, and I think hate directed at a refugee group or another vulnerable group affects all of us. It damages the fabric of society, and it makes that inclusivity and social cohesion impossible. So by perpetrating hate speech, we have ingraining of chauvinism and suspicion and insecurity and fear, and religious leaders who really have the credibility and the audience and that position of power in our communities do need to use their platform to speak out against this and to reach out to the refugee groups to build trust and to change people's perceptions of foreigners.
Thank you. Father Rampe, do you, can you also respond? Yeah.
Thank you. I think the first one that I would like to comment on is it was about what are we doing, and I think there are the religious communities, they are doing a lot at the moment with regards to firstly accompanying the refugees and the forcibly displaced, especially the vulnerable ones. Offering services for them. In South Africa, we have from different communities, religious communities. You do have people serving and making sure that they offer some kind of socio-economic assistance to the forcibly displaced and the vulnerable. So there is a lot happening, I can say. And then there was also a question of the intervention on the causes of displacement. And I think it's important that people realize that the religious communities, they also advocate for the rights of refugees, and we are trying to look into stopping the root causes of this forced displacement. So there is a lot of work, advocacy work and lobbying that that's going on, and people engaging governments and engaging policymakers to come up with policies that will actually effectively protect the rights of the forcibly displaced and refugees. And the religious voice, it's not missing. I think people should realize that the religious leaders, they are very vocal when it comes to talking about the rights and protection of refugees and forcibly displaced. For example, in the Christian tradition at the moment, Pope Francis is very vocal on the well-being of refugees and how we should welcome them, protect them, and integrate them into our communities. And in South Africa, for example, during World Refugee Day, which we celebrated on Saturday, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, they released a statement raising concerns, among which they touched on the question of hate speech, which Elena alluded to. There's this hashtag that's trending at the moment, hashtag put South Africa first, or hashtag put South Africans first, which is calling for foreigners to be discriminated against when it comes to all these socioeconomic needs. So the Catholic Church, it did raise concerns on those kind of hate speeches, if I may put it that way. Thank you.
Okay, this time I forgot to switch on my microphone. I saw another question that came through, in fact, two questions that came through on Zoom platform, and I'll take them as the last questions, and then we will get the closing remarks. I'll just go to the question part. My question is, this is Moelo asking the question, why is it so difficult to speak and acting about refugee violence to faithful people? Okay, but not sure. Okay, Moelo also said, sometimes we witness violence and problems refugees face, but sometimes we do not know what to do to help. The youth of St. Mary's Nyanga in Cape Town started addressing issues around violence against refugees, but we are not sure what more we can do to help. I think the question is, apart from offering assistance, what else can we do? I think, I'm not sure if I'm wrong, but I'm sensing that people want to do something more so we can prevent these things from happening, not just responding to what has happened. Father Rampe, do you want to respond to that?
Oh yes, I think I know Melo.
Okay, good.
I've actually challenged them, that group of youth, to do something. But I think what is important is for them to constantly, you see, advocacy, it's not a once-off activity, or lobbying is not a once-off activity. And as you can see, for example, in South Africa, we've had so many waves of xenophobia coming and going. It's something that's recurring. So even with interventions like people of good heart and well, it shouldn't be a once-off thing. They should be coming. They should be recurring as well, and they should also be engaging their friends in the townships on harming them. Pope Francis, he talks of a culture of indifference and a culture of encounter, meaning that the culture of indifference, that's what causes a problem, because people, they don't know about one another. But once you have this culture of encounter which embraces the other, then you know more about the other, and you start knowing why they are here, why they left their countries. And as human beings, we are inherently good. And when somebody tells you their story, what kind of human rights violation they've experienced on their journey towards your country, somehow that touches the heart and people change attitudes. So that culture of encounter should be encouraged as well between the host community and the refugee community.
Alana, do you also, would you like, maybe you can share your closing remarks as well if you would like to respond to the last question and combine it with your closing remarks perhaps.
Perfect. I just want to say that I completely agree with Father Rampe. I think that is going to be the key going forward, to the best way that people of faith can assist and work with refugees, and also the way that we can look at really getting to the heart of the challenges that they face and dealing with xenophobia is through, as he said, sustained long-term engagement. If we meet somebody and we know their personal story and we learn about their culture and their language and their food, we'll see so many similarities between them and ourselves. And it's on those similarities that we can really see the humanity in everyone and build upon that. So I think that that is key. In any way that people can get involved, there are a multitude of amazing programs happening across the country at a grassroots level. So if you are wanting to get involved, I would encourage you to seek some of those out and volunteer your time and expertise, because the more the merrier. It's really needed at this time. And Aidan, before I move to my closing remarks, I did want to bring up the topic of COVID-19, because I think it's such a relevant point today. And it's something that worries me when I think about the refugee community, because as we look to the future, I really feel that the impact of this global pandemic is only going to make life more difficult for refugees, those that are wanting to flee persecution and those who are in foreign countries trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. So they will need our assistance now more than ever. And also, as Father Rampe said, there's amazing refugee organizations doing a lot of work on this issue. And one such organization, the Scalabrini Center based in Cape Town, the day before World Refugee Day, they won a court order that they had taken the government to court, and this court order ensured that a lot of the asylum seekers and people who hold special permits in South Africa would be able to apply for the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress Grant. And that was a very important move, and I think religious groups really need to add their voice and their weight behind efforts like these to assist refugees so that they can have access and they can have their human rights respected during this time. My closing remarks would be quite brief, but just to say that I really think that the time has come for ordinary South Africans and all of us who live in this beautiful country to really ensure that refugees are not only welcomed in our land, but respected, and that their cultures and their communities are celebrated. Because as we've seen tonight from our discussions, all of our religions place a huge moral obligation on us to speak out against any form of racism and bigotry, and to stand up for the human rights of others. And as a Jewish person whose community knows all too well how derogatory words and hateful rhetoric can lead not only to discriminatory laws, but also to genocide, it's really important for myself and for others to take up the words that we heard after the Holocaust, never again, and to use them for all humanity, to motivate us to fight hatred wherever we find it. So we should act in solidarity with refugees, and we should all remember that we are all migrants on this earth, journeying together in hope, and we should be working together to create a better future for all. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. I see we've got Mr. Omar with us, so I will give it to you again. So please go ahead and share your thoughts with us. We are about to close, but we'll give you a few minutes to make a point.
Thank you very much. What I would like to say, as well as closing remark, is a refugee is considered a vulnerable person. He might be in difficulty when he arrives, but when people invest in refugee, they gain more than they think. Because refugee, most of the time, are people fully equipped with a lot of capability, a lot of intellectual strength that they can put to use in the host country when they are welcome. I would take my example personally. Fortunately, I'm not a refugee, but a migrant here. When I arrived here, I discovered some few things that, according to my own understanding, were not good. And I tried to bridge that gap. And what did I do? I produced here, for example, from 2006 to 2012, 450 nurses, because I wanted to see the nurses who will not be able to go on strike for a year long. So I trained personally. I opened a school year for training the nurses and produce nurses that most of them are in certain hospitals. Yeah, they work with in mind the desire to save the lives. It's not too much about money for them, but it's about giving safety to people health-wise. I think people can invest into that kind of in that approach and develop a better cooperation between the people coming from abroad, like migrant, and the local community. So that's my own approach, and I think if we go that way, you will not ever hear about xenophobia and everything. Yeah, thank you. Let me run before the connection goes again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I apologize for the technical glitches. We would love to hear, to have heard more from you, but perhaps another time we will do that. Father Rampe, your closing remarks?
Yeah, just my parting shots. I will be very short as well. I think what is important, and from our discussion today, is to encourage people, firstly, to take seriously the fact that the image of God in us, and with that image of God comes human dignity, and from whence come human rights. So we shouldn't look at human rights from a legal perspective, but from a moral and ethical perspective. I think that's what is important. That's the first point that I want to mention. And then secondly, encourage the culture of encounter, where people, they really try and learn more about others instead of just being indifferent. Just learn, why are these people here? Why would somebody leave his or her country to come and want to be in a French country like this? And with that, I think with that we can learn more about one another, and we will stop things like scapegoating, where each time when we have our own problems, then we attack these people who came, who are not even responsible for the challenges and difficulties, socioeconomic problems that we have here in South Africa. So for me, human rights should be ethical and moral, have a culture of encounter, and let's eliminate scapegoating, and make sure that we know where the root causes of our problems are. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone, Elana, Father Rampe, Mr. Omar, for being with us and sharing your perspectives. And I think the last points about knowing each other ties quite well with us, with our motto. As you can see behind me, our motto is turquoise, is so we may know one another, and which is the essence of the work that Turquoise is trying to do, to bring people together and encouraging people to know about the other, so that we can really minimize the misconceptions, misunderstandings, and perhaps negativity that will lead to worse consequences. In closing, I would like to, I was asked to make two announcements. And that is that it also, I think, ties with our discussion tonight, that Turquoise is planning another event for in the next week or so on the social cohesion in refugee hosting settings. So I think that will be an interesting discussion. Please watch our social media space for details. And also, we've got another event which we would like to invite everyone. Turquoise Women and Family Platform hosts cooking classes once a month. And it's usually the ladies who come together and do it, but this time, because of June being posting the Father's Day, we will have two fathers actually cooking food and sharing it through social media. We actually have our national Executive Director, Mr. Chetin, Ayhan Chetin, who will be making a burger, I believe. So I would encourage everyone to come and join on your screens, and I'll definitely be in the kitchen and watching from the kitchen, trying to make what's being shown. So that's this Saturday at 1 o'clock. So we invite everyone to join us through this social media. Yes, and you see it on your screen at the moment. In closing, I think I would like to make one or 2 points, which is that we are basically facing a human crisis, and what we see, the faith and the religions, in essence, they teach the same message of tolerance and love. But we also see people of faith. While we see people of faith being persecuted, we also see sometimes people of faith persecuting the others. So it's also, there's a lot big human dimension, like you've raised earlier, and also populism. Populism is a very bad disease that our time is facing, and unfortunately, a lot of the problems Father Rampe has raised is scapegoating. Scapegoating is being abused for a lot of political agendas, etc. And and populism comes in quite strongly in that. I think these are important things that we have to keep in mind and watch as we engage in our daily activities, and as we talk about all these crises. Because refugees, asylum seekers, they are just people. They're trying to make a life for themselves, just like any one of us. Like we get a job in a certain place, and we have to migrate. And unfortunately, they don't have that luxury. They are forced to leave, and it is an important and quite sad human catastrophe. So thank you very much for everyone, for all the panelists who joined us on our different social media platforms to come and join us for this important discussion. Let's take it forward in our own social circles, and let's make a difference in our own communities. Thank you very much from Turquoise Harmony Institute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Well done.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. B.